every day in nature. Great Spirit, we awaken to the sun's glory of light, praising you each morning. You are the blue dome above the limitless sky beyond. You are in the warmth that embraces Mother Earth, the rain that quenches your thirst, giving renewal to life and all your children. You are in the brightness of sunlit leaves. You are in the congregation of great rocks, strength giving among which we stand steadfast. You are in the stillness in the mountains and the corresponding stillness in us, deeper than all stirrings of self. You are the cliffs and trees which birds dart down and sing. You are the roots and the wings, the singer and the song. You are the listening world, and your signature is the beauty of things. Into this sanctuary of memory we have come, because even though we sit in the presence of a great loss and are saddened and confused by what we face, we are nevertheless assured that there is a spirit alive in the world over which death has no dominion, a light which no darkness can extinguish. We come together, family and friends, to pay tribute to Gary's spirit and to give thanks for all the gifts of life which, because of him, we have been the recipients. Gary was a person who cared deeply about others. He was a son and a brother and a husband, a father and a grandfather, a friend and a landscape architect, and so much more. He was a precious individual. And it may seem strange that we should call this a celebration of life when in the face of such a sudden and unexpected death, it's a heartbreaking loss. And celebration may not be what we feel in our hearts at this moment. When a person is taken from us so quickly and with so much left to live for, it leaves us stunned. Yet it would be a mistake in Gary's case to focus on his untimely death when it is his life, his immensely generative life that has drawn us all here today. His death came too soon, but that certainly does not diminish the value of his life. It's Gary's life that has touched all of our own lives and will continue to touch it for years to come, and that's what's drawn us to this place. We grieve for what might have been, but we also honor the blessings that remain. And so today is a time of mourning, but it's also a time of laughing, a time of grief, a time of sharing, a time to weep, a time to smile, a time to remember, a time to heal, a time to give thanks, a time to embrace old friends, and a time to let go of past sorrows. We gather in the hope that in the time of Gary's death, he might strengthen our hold on life. Let us pray. Beloved, we are surrounded on every side by a multitude of wonders. Every corner of this great earth is filled with its own special miracles of sight and sound. There's a beauty in the world, in all its varied manifestations and disguises. It's visible in the daily witness of nature's unfailing order and providence, and in the mysterious depths of our own being, in the call of the heart's adventure, in those countless affirmations when our openness to life confirms the very meaning of life in happiness and joy. And yet the essence of life's meanings remain a great and powerful mystery to us. The wherefores, the whys, the hows. And yet what we do not know, we're driven to find out. What we do not understand, we're inspired to search for and comprehend. And so we come to this place in thanksgiving and gratitude to sing our praise of life in all its complexities, in all its uncertainties, and to confirm those things which he whom we honor, honored with his mind, his heart, and his spirit. Amen.
know your life on earth was troubled, and only you could know the pain. You weren't afraid to face the devil. You weren't a stranger to the rain. So go rest high on that mountain. Son, your work on earth is done. Go to heaven a-shouting love for the Father and the Son. Oh, how we cried the day you left us. We gathered round your grave to grieve. Wish I could see those angels' faces when they hear your sweet voice sing. So go rest high on that mountain. Son, your work on earth is done. Go to heaven a-shouting love for the Father and the Son. So go rest high on that mountain. Son, your work on earth is done. Go to heaven a-shouting love for the Father and the Son.
We have two readings. Our first reading comes from the Christian scriptures from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. This translation comes from the Message Bible, a translation I really like of this passage. If I speak with human elegance and eloquence and angelic ecstasy, but don't have love, I'm nothing but the creaking of a rusty gate. I'm nothing. If I have faith that says to a mountain, jump, and it jumps, but I don't have love, I'm nothing. If I give everything I own to the poor and even go to the stake to be burned as a martyr, but I don't have love, I've gotten nowhere. So no matter what I say, what I believe, and what I do, I'm bankrupt without love. Love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self. Love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut, doesn't have a swelled head, doesn't force itself on others. It isn't always me first. It doesn't fly off the handle. It doesn't keep score of the sins of others. It doesn't revel when others grovel. It takes pleasure in the flowering of truth, puts up with anything, always looks for the best, never looks back, but keeps going to the end. Love never dies. Inspired speech will be over someday. When I was an infant at my mother's breast, I gurgled and cooed like an infant. When I grew up, I left those infant ways for good. We don't yet see things clearly. We're squinting in a fog. We're peering through a mist. But it won't be long before the weather clears and the sun shines bright. We'll see it all then, see it all as clearly as God sees us. But for right now, we have 3 things to do. Trust steadily in God, hope unswervingly, and love extravagantly. And the greatest of these is love. And our second reading is, in fact, a children's story. I thought of this especially after last Sunday and talking to Mary Jane and with so many grandchildren who just were his world. I thought this story was perfectly fitting. It's called Miss Rumphius by Barbara Cooney. It's about someone called the Lupine Lady who lives in a small house overlooking the sea. In between the rocks around the house grow blue and purple and rose-colored flowers. The Lupine Lady is little and she's old, but she has not always been that way. Now, I know this. She is my great aunt, and she told me so. Once upon a time, she was a little girl named Alice who lived in a city by the sea. From the front stoop, she could see the wharves and the bristling masts of tall ships. Many years ago, her grandfather had come to America on a large sailing ship. Now he worked in a shop at the bottom of the house, making figureheads for the prows of ships. For Alice's grandfather was an artist, and she liked to paint along with him. In the evening, Alice sat on her grandfather's knee, and he listened to his stories from faraway places. When he had finished, Alice would say, "When I grow up, I too will go to faraway places, and when I grow old, I too will live by the sea." "That is all very well, little Alice," said her grandfather. "But there's a third thing you must do." "What is that?" asked Alice. "You must do something to make the world more beautiful," said her grandfather. "All right," said Alice, but she didn't know what that could be. In the meantime, Alice got up and she washed her face, she ate her breakfast, and she went to school and came home and did her homework. And pretty soon she'd grown up. And then my Aunt Alice set out to do the three things that she'd told her grandfather she was going to do. She left home, she saw the world, and she went to live by the sea. People called her Miss Rumphius now. From the porch of her new house, Miss Rumphius watched the sun come up. She started a garden among the rocks that surrounded her house, and she planted flower seeds in the stony ground. Miss Rumphius was almost perfectly happy. "But there's still one more thing I have to do," she said. "I have to do something to make the world more beautiful." But what? The world already is pretty nice, she thought. The next spring, Miss Rumphius was not very well. Her back was bothering her again, and she had to stay in bed most of the time. The flowers that she had planted the summer before had come up, and they bloomed in spite of the stony ground. And she could see them from her bedroom window, blue and purple and rose-colored. "Lupines," said Miss Rumphius with satisfaction. "I've always loved lupines the best. I wish I could plant more seeds this summer so that I'd have more flowers next year," but she wasn't able to do it. After a hard winter, spring came, and Miss Rumphius was feeling much better. Now she could walk again, and one afternoon she started up over the hill where she had not been in a long time. "I don't believe my eyes," she cried. For there, on the other side of the hill, was a large patch of blue and purple and rose-colored lupines. It was the wind that brought the seeds from my garden here, and the birds must have helped. Then Miss Rumphius had a wonderful idea. She hurried home, she got out her seed catalog, she sent off to the very best seed houses for 5 bushels of lupine seeds. All that summer, Miss Rumphius, her pockets full of seeds, wandered over fields and heartlands, sowing lupines. She scattered seeds all along the highways and down the country lanes. She flung handfuls of them around the schoolhouse and in the back of the church. She tossed them into the hollows and along the stone walls. Her back didn't hurt her anymore at all. The next spring, there were lupines everywhere. Fields and hillsides were covered with blue and purple and rose-colored flowers. They bloomed along the highways and down the lanes, bright patches laid around the schoolhouse and the back of the church, down in the hollows, and all along the stone walls grew beautiful flowers. Miss Rumphius had done the third thing, the most difficult thing of all. My great-aunt Alice, Miss Rumphius, is very old now. Her hair is very white. Every year there are more and more lupines, and now they call her the Lupine Lady. Sometimes my friends stand with me outside of her gate, curious to see the old lady who planted the fields of lupines. When she invites us in, they come slowly. They think she's the oldest woman in the world. Often she tells us stories of faraway places. When I grow up, I tell her, I too will go to faraway places, and I'll come home to live by the sea. This is all very well, little Alice, says my aunt, but there is a third thing you must do. What is that, I ask? You must do something to make the world more beautiful. All right, I say, but I don't know yet what that can be. Here ends the story. Reflections followed by other wonderful family and friends.
I'm Heidi Ewing, Gary's daughter. Our family is so grateful and blessed to have such wonderful people join us here today to celebrate the wonderful life of my dad. I want to take a few minutes to share some of the thoughts I had about growing up as a Lindaman. My dad loved Griswold-style family vacations. He did not like to fly at all, and in fact, it was 30 years before he stepped on a plane after he started dating my mom. So pretty much every summer, we would take absolutely incredible road trips. One of the longest we ever took was 14 states. I don't know if you guys have taken many road trips before with your family, but traveling 14 states together is a true accomplishment. A lot of times we travel for 10 to 12 days in our minivan. Eric had the back bench seat and I had the front bench seat, so we were nice and separated. I had my Barbies, he had his Ninja Turtles back there, we were good to go. I got to see so much of the country because my dad didn't like to fly. One of the downsides to driving cross country so much is that you spend a lot of time in the car and it gives the opportunity for getting pulled over a lot. And he got pulled over a lot. One of the times specifically, we were either coming back from Kansas City or from Iowa, and he had to pee so bad he was flying down the road. We don't know exactly how far over the speed limit he was going, but it was enough that they were going to give him a ticket for sure, and he assured them it was because he had to pee. So the officer followed us into the next town, and we pulled into McDonald's, and the police officer sat there while he went in and used the bathroom. Another time, he sat in the back seat with the officer in the patrol car, and the officer noticed that there was a Oklahoma State sticker on the back of my mom's car. And he's like, "Oh, did you go to Oklahoma State?" And he's like, "Yeah, I followed their baseball team." And he's like, "I played baseball at Iowa State." And they got to talking, and he just let him go. And this was kind of a common occurrence, was that he just got let go. The thing was that at that time, we weren't attending Oklahoma State. My mom had bought that sticker at a gas station and put it over her Blue Cross Blue Shield sticker because she was undercover for insurance fraud, visiting a chiropractor. So a garage or a convenience store sticker got him out of yet another ticket. We have a ton of wonderful traveling stories, but one I want to quickly tell is we refer to it as the raft story. My dad was a bargain shopper, and getting caught up in Sam's, they have fun little things at the front of the store, and one that he happened upon one day was a raft, a 2-person raft with 1 oar. And he thought this was great. So we had it in our attic for 2 years. And it was never used, and we were headed to the mountains. And he decided we were taking it with us. So we got to our spot in the mountains, and we inflated it. We drove around with it for 4 days in the back of our van, looking for a place to put it in, because Eric and I were getting in it, and they decided we couldn't put it in anything with rapids because they literally have to drive down the road to follow us. And so finally they found a quiet little pond for us to get in. So he sets it in, helps me in, and I immediately hear a psst. And I had stepped in right on a rock, and that was the end of the raft. It didn't make it home. Another thing he loved was waking us up. If he felt like Eric and I had slept too late on the weekends, he would go outside our windows and mow and mow and mow and weed eat and weed eat. And I think he just left it running sometimes. If that didn't do the trick, then I would get a knock at my door, and I would get a bucket placed in my room, which is my cue to get up and get to work in the yard and pull the weeds. He loved to cheer us on. Eric and I both played, Eric played football and I played soccer. He helped coach both of us on our respective sports during our childhood. And he was extremely competitive and driven, and that came out in both of our play when we played our sports. He was so committed to supporting our sports endeavors that one year for Eric's football playoffs, at Jinx, the football players dye their hair blonde. Dad decided he wanted to join in the fun, and he had Eric dye a J in his chest hair for the playoffs. He loved his job. He worked incredibly hard. Loved creating beautiful spaces for people to enjoy with their loved ones. There was always a yellow legal pad of paper on the table. He constantly took notes on everything. He would even wake up in the middle of the night about your guys' projects. He would make notes and go back to bed. And then we were on the receiving end of what we called the white flash. This was almost a daily event when he'd come home from work. My dad would come home filthy and covered in dirt and sweat, absolutely caked in it. Here's the problem. The laundry room is at one end of the house, and his bedroom is at the other end. We had a really long ranch-style home. You see the problem here, right? We would hear him call out, "Is the front door closed?" Our friends over, if the answers were all no, we would hear him coming. He would literally sprint the whole length of the house, and we'd see a white flash of him in his tidy whities. He would get pumped up to sprint. He would literally and he just it was like a game for him to make it to the back in a full sprint. He loved making people laugh, being kind every day of his life. My wish is that all of you will take the kindness my dad showed you and share that same kindness with others. Love all of you. Thank you for being a part of our lives. And thank you for being with us here today.
I'm Eric Lindaman, Gary's son. Gosh, where to start, so many memories, so many things to say. But I'm going to make it easy on you. I've got one story. So, Dad and I had numerous adventures together, which were always filled with laughter and meaningful conversations. While we went on many road trips looking for those opportunities for adventure, one of our most memorable was actually in our own backyard. While living at our house on Sandusky Avenue in Highfield, we had a bit of a squirrel problem. To the extent that squirrels found their way into our attic, it is believed that one unfortunate squirrel may have bitten into some electrical wires, electrocuting itself, and it falling between one of the interior walls of the house. This became problematic because the smell persisted for months to come. At this point, it was determined by Dad that the squirrels had to go, and he officially declared war with the squirrels. And since using rifles would typically be frowned upon by the neighbors, we instead planned to use BB guns as our weapon of choice. So one particular summer day, we could hear the squirrels running around on the roof without a care. Dad called me into action as we each grabbed our BB guns, pursuing the squirrels. When outside, Dad was able to force one of the squirrels to the north end of the house. Now, on the north side of the house was a Bradford pear tree Dad had planted years before, and that was high enough the squirrels could safely jump onto it, but made it a challenge to jump back to the roof, making it a one-way exit. So meanwhile, Mom had her, was inside, safe indoors for most of the events, she could see. And later, she would describe seeing the north back gate opening to the front yard, seeing the tip of a BB gun stick out from the gate as I moved toward the squirrel's escape route at the Bradford pear. So the squirrel, having made the jump of no return, was now trapped. So Dad caught up to me, and we both attempted to duly strike the squirrel. The squirrel quickly realized it was running out of time and fast. As Dad and I circled the tree to get better shot angles, out of desperation, the squirrel leaped out of the tree and landed directly on my back. This scared, for lack of a better term, the Snickers bars out of me. It's a dad joke. I immediately freaked out, trying to shake off the squirrel, but it was hanging on to me, having latched its claws into my shirt. So it wasn't until I flung forward that it flew off of me and began to run for its life again. Because simultaneously I ran at the squirrel, screaming profanities at the top of my lungs. Yes, the burbs were alive and well that day. But in the moments after, all I can remember hearing in the background is my dad's unique, booming laugh. Everyone knows what that is. Dad was always present with those around him. He taught me the value of hard work and persistence in all things. But at the same time, Dad loved to laugh and find adventure every day.
Good morning. Sorry. My name is Kyle Johnson, and I'm part of Gary's family. Gary Lindaman was the ultimate family man, and that's why I'm so honored to speak about him today. I was born an only child, and was an only child until my mom, Melody, remarried when I was in my mid-20s. And as part of that union, I gained for the first time a stepbrother, Preston. Preston, shortly thereafter, became married to Gary and Mary Jane's daughter, Heidi. And so that means that I am speaking to you today about the love of my early adulthood stepbrother's father-in-law, which is quite a few degrees of separation of not blood related. And going by the rules of society, Gary and Mary Jane, the two of them are always inseparable to me. We're really under no obligation to view me as family, and yet they both chose me, joining me and my mom and my daughter Maeve and Heidi and Preston and their daughters Kylie and Kate for many long Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners through the last 15 years. More often than not, these holiday gatherings concluded with a lively and raucous sessions of Gary's favorite card game, Oh Hell, which he always told us was a very dynamic card game. Gary and Mary Jane chose me as family and Maeve as family out of love, pure and simple, love for people. Gary is one of those incredibly rare people for whom it was simply easier for him to choose to love than to choose not to love. And in that, he taught me an invaluable life lesson that it is actually easier to choose to love. And there's another aspect of Gary's life which I think speaks to the nature of his approach to love. As we all know, Gary, who was the son of Iowa farmers, had a thriving career as a talented landscape architect, designing and shaping hundreds of beautiful gardens and green spaces for homes and businesses throughout the Tulsa area. Now, we all have jobs or careers of some sort, even if that job might be student or it isn't paid with a traditional paycheck. And certainly, some of us have the good fortune that we enjoy and love our jobs more than others. But here's my question for you. How many of us here today, no matter how much we may love our jobs, when the workday is done and our free time begins, the very first thing we want to do is keep doing our jobs? Well, that was Gary. That was how much love he had for his job. Of all the amazing gardens and yards and parks and landscapes that he built throughout the city and the area, none rivaled Gary's own personal garden in his South Tulsa home. If you haven't ever seen Gary's garden, it's incredible. No mirror-like assortment of flower beds. It's a full 360-degree wraparound of the home, a symphony of variety and color and levels and textures. It's not a garden, really. It was Gary's love song. And not just his love song for botanical life, but Gary's love song to the love that he had for everything. It was a love song to love itself. So, at the gathering of friends and family at Gary and Mary Jane's house just a few days after he passed, it was natural that many people soon gravitated outside to spend time in Gary's wonderful garden in full, magnificent bloom, only so very recently lovingly tendered. And In the conversations, it was then natural that the sort of talk shifted to the question of what will become of Gary's garden. I'm not sure that anyone knows for sure at this time, but the most honest answer that I know in my heart is that Gary's garden will never be the same. Sure, it might be possible to hire the most loving and talented landscape architect in Tulsa, who, until very recently, was the second most loving and talented landscape architect in Tulsa. But even then, it won't be the same. It will be somebody's job. Gary's garden will no longer be somebody's labor of pure love. As I look out on the faces of friends and family here today, we who loved and were so loved by Gary, a version of the same question is inescapable. What will happen to us now that Gary is gone? And the most honest answer I know is that Gary's garden will never be the same. But we will continue to grow and thrive and love more than we would have because we have been taught that it is easier to love than not to love. Our lives have all been touched and nurtured by the kindest, gentlest, most loving of gardeners, Papa, my early adulthood stepbrother's father-in-law, our dear friend and family member, Gary.
Good morning. I'm Meredith Lindaman. I have the pleasure of being Eric's wife and Gary's favorite daughter-in-law. And just so you know, I'm the only one. Gary was above all else relational. This room is a testament to that. It was his gift to all of those who encountered him and extended beyond his family and friends to even remote acquaintances. And if by some chance you were a stranger to Gary Lindaman, it was only because he had not yet had the chance to shake your hand and ask your name. And you would not have been a stranger for long. It went beyond just knowing your name and a few basic facts. Gary truly saw each person he encountered. In a culture that says, "Here I am," Gary was truly a "there you are" person. This was no more true than with his 6 grandchildren, each with unique interests and personalities. Papa was intentional about creating a personal connection with each one. At family events, he was most often found rallying the grandkids for a common cause, not an easy task when the kids range in ages from 16 to 2. Papa pre-planned elaborate outdoor games or creative activities. Papa was in trouble almost as much as the kids. Whether that was handing out his Snickers bars before 9 a.m., flying paper airplanes over the second-floor balcony, or driving his truck through the neighborhood with the grandkids piled in the back bed. And Papa never wanted the fun to stop at his house. He frequently sent us home with whatever treasure he had created during their playtime. This required us to transport home a lifetime's worth of balloons and Brahms sacks and any number of homemade creations. And this was in addition to the little hands that Papa stuffed with Snickers, or in some cases, peppermints. As we drive into their neighborhood, there's a slight corner before their driveway is visible. On most days, we would turn that corner and find the driveway littered with various riding toys, giant inflatable balls, and some makeshift banner and folding chairs. The Papa setup was the perfect reflection of who Gary was as Papa, inviting, creative, and playful. It also announced to the entire neighborhood that the Lindaman grandchildren were arriving. It was his version of a welcome mat, and usually accompanied by a Donald Duck imitation of a greeting. Admittedly, Papa's antics frequently garnered disapproving glances from the other adults, most often me with the 4 young children. But thankfully, we did not rein him in too often, because those are now some of our most treasured memories. A friend told me in recent days that grief is the bill come due on love you've already enjoyed. And I found that to be so. Our hearts are broken and we are sad, but it is only because of the great love we each experienced in sharing our lives with this wonderful man.
My name is Dylan Springer. I am married to Casey, who is Gary's niece. When Casey, my wife, called me this week, or last week, and told me of Gary's passing, the first thing that popped into my mind was his inviting, smiling face. Even just the way his eyes were when he smiled. That's how I always think of Gary, smiling and chuckling with me, and his eyes saying, "Isn't this great? Isn't this great, just the two of us here talking and being together?" That's what his eyes always portrayed. Coming up to Tulsa every year for the holidays and other times that we were here, I always looked forward to talking with Gary. And I've found that in life, plenty of people like to talk, but very few really listen and enjoy to listen. And Gary did that. He really wanted to converse. He was always engaged fully when we talked. He always asked questions, and he always genuinely wanted to know the answers. Ann and I were talking this week, and she has a hibiscus that was struggling in her garden. She said that it was getting to her, that she can't pick up that phone and call Gary and say, "What do I do?" I remember one year that Gary gave Ann for her birthday the plans for the landscaping design and everything at her house. And of course, it turned out amazing, better than any of us could imagine. And Ann was so proud of it. And she always said, "I always feel like Gary's part of this house because of that." And even now, there's a Japanese maple in the house she's at now, and every time we drive up, it's right where Gary told her to plant it. And we always think of Gary, even when walking into Ann's front door. I talked to Scott, who was his nephew who couldn't be here this week because he was traveling. And he talked about one of the favorite things he got to do was talk to Gary about traveling. They got to talk about the travels they went on, the wonderful places they were at, and Gary would always bring up to Iowa and Iowa wrestling. And they got to talk, and Scott was a wrestler, and he went to OSU, so I often wonder, did they talk about which team was better at wrestling? And there are people from Iowa here, and there are Oklahomans, and I think we know who was probably the best. My wife, Casey, echoed all these things that I've said, and she talked about connecting with Gary and talking and his kindness, and she said, "I remember his huge hugs, and I remember how warm and so loving that he was all the time." Attention is really a form of generosity. When someone's really paying attention to you, they are laying themselves aside, they're being selfless, and they're focusing on you. And this was Gary. He paid attention to everyone that he conversed with. He paid attention to you. He was always warm and kind and loving and selfless in so many ways, and he was joyful. And these were gifts that Gary had. And I believe that each person is created in the image of God, and that God gives us gifts, and that there's great purpose in our life for us to use those gifts. And Gary used the gifts that he had. So we're up here listening to family talk about Gary. We see the gifts he had. We see how he used them, and we see the beautiful picture of what it's like when those gifts are used. I was reading a book this week by Dallas Willard, and it says, "Your work is the total amount of lasting good that you will accomplish in your lifetime. For most of us, our families will be the largest part of the lasting good that we produce." And sitting up here, we can all look at Mary, and we can look at Heidi and Preston, and we can look at Eric and Meredith, and all the grandkids, and we can say, what a great lasting work Gary has engaged in all of his life and left. Thank you.
Almost heaven, West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River. Life is old there, older than the trees, younger than the mountains, growing like a breeze. Country roads, take me home to the place that I belong. West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home. Country roads, all my memories gather around her. Miner's lady, stranger to blue water, dark and dusty, painted on the sky. Misty taste of moonshine, teardrop in my eye. Country roads, take me home to the place I belong. West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home. Country roads, and I hear her voice in the morning hours. She calls me. The radio reminds me of my home, far away, and driving down the road, I get a feeling that I should have been home yesterday, yesterday. Country roads, take me home to the place that I belong. West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home. Country roads.
Gary was born in Albert Lee, Minnesota, the second child of Betty and Robert Zimmerman. They were divorced when he was still an infant. So for the first 5 years of Gary's life, he did not have a father. He never knew his father. And then his mother moved them back to Iowa to be with her family, and she met Alvin Lindaman at a square dance. Alvin adopted Gary and his sister, and Gary took the middle name Allen, and Betty and Alvin then had their third child, Bill. Both Bill and his sister are here. They lived on a 160-acre farm, growing corn and soybean, raising cattle and chickens. Gary was a true Iowa farm boy. And on Sundays, his family attended a little white Presbyterian church in the country. Gary was a good athlete. He played basketball and football and baseball. He played the flute in the band, and he sang in the church choir. Gary was part of a competitive quartet in high school and the Iowa State Chorus. When Gary was 12, his sister Gail really wanted a pony. She wanted it so bad, she talked her little brother, Gary, into splitting the cost of $80 for the pony. It was a lot of money back then. And he agreed, and they named the pony Buckshot. But every time Gary got on the pony, Buckshot headed straight for the peach trees and knocked him off. One time, Buckshot dropped him right into the water. Gary was mad for the rest of his life about having spent that $40 on that pony. And one of the great examples of sister-in-law affection, after Gary died, Mary Jane received a condolence card from his sister Gail that contained a check for $40. May Gary finally rest in peace. After high school, Gary attended Iowa State University, as we heard, and he was an excellent student in math, so his mother encouraged him to become an engineer, and he majored in engineering. He also played intramural sports. He learned to play bridge, and soon he won the intramural bridge championship. All these extracurricular activities kept Gary from attending all of his classes faithfully. So he decided that he needed to take some time off, and he found a job with an engineering firm, and a week later, he received a draft notice to go to Vietnam. He served the next 2 years in the Army, in both Saigon and near the front lines. And when he came home, he went back to school on the GI Bill. He finished at Iowa State with a degree in landscape architecture. His first job was in Omaha, Nebraska, until the oil crisis of the mid-'70s, and that's when he came to Tulsa, and he took a job with the Corps of Engineers. It was in 1977 that he met the love of his life. Back then, Gary played softball with some of the people who Mary Jane worked with, and that's how they met. And then one night, they were both at a bar that had a dance floor, and Gary danced with every girl that was there except for Mary Jane. He decided to wait for the last dance of the night to ask Mary Jane, and she still remembers that night in his arms, she felt like she was home. They were married in 1979 at College Hill Presbyterian Church here in Tulsa. And back then, Gary used to play guitar and sing at local clubs in Tulsa. He played songs by John Prine and others. One night he was playing a whole set of John Prine songs, and the owner of the club came over and he told him to change the songs because they were too depressing and no one was buying beer. In 1979, Gary started his own company, and in 1984, he left the Corps of Engineers and went into business for himself full-time. By then, they'd had Heidi and Eric in their lives. It was a full life, and we've already heard what a wonderful father he was. And there are so many more stories to tell about the fun games that he would invent to entertain his growing children, or the nights that he would spend after work playing catch in the backyard with a football with Eric until the sun went down, and they kept playing long into the dark. Heidi and Eric spreading mulch at various work sites, which didn't seem that memorable at the time, but now they see the many life lessons and the values that their father taught them along the way. Susie Ewing and her then husband Stan were friends with Gary and Mary Jane going back to the early 80s. Susie was in a babysitting co-op with Mary Jane, and nobody would have guessed back then that little Preston Ewing and Heidi Lindaman would one day get married. They were both, of course, in this little play group. But back in 1982, there was a big snowstorm here in Tulsa one night, and Mary Jane woke up, and she noticed that the bed was empty, and she had no idea where Gary was. She went looking for him. His car was still there. And then she looked outside. She could see the footprints going into the snow, and then they disappeared. She had no idea where he was. Apparently, Gary couldn't sleep, so he decided to go take a walk in the snow. And the funniest part was when Stan and Susie dropped Gary off back home in their car. Apparently, they also couldn't sleep, and they decided to go for a drive to Safeway to buy donuts. And they were surprised to find Gary wandering around in the snow all by himself. They were all having an adventure. Gary loved adventures and nature and good friends. This story exemplifies all of those joys in his life. There were so many things that brought Gary's life alive. His work, of course. He was so grateful to have all the people who let him do what he loved by helping them create beautiful landscapes around their homes. It needs to be named that Gary could out-shovel anybody of any age his entire life. He was both an Iowa farm boy and very competitive. If he were around this past couple of weeks, he would have gotten his chainsaw out and he would have been helping strangers to cut limbs all over town. It wasn't until recently that Mary Jane learned that Gary had been buying gift cards and giving them out to strangers in random acts of kindness for a long time. He was generous to a fault. Then, of course, he was also frugal. Both generous and frugal. He would be known to buy a 5-pound bag of potatoes because they were cheaper for Mary Jane, even though they barely ate potatoes. But his frugality was not about being cheap. It was about his sense of stewardship of resources, of nature, of money, and of relationships. It was at a public hearing about the concept of the gathering place that there was a call for proposals for ideas for the park. Gary sent in the idea to create land bridges and tunnels over Riverside Drive to connect the park to the river. That's a gift that he gave to Tulsa that will last long after he is gone. That and his work to establish Up With Trees, that program here in our city, his work designing the Mingo Creek Drainage Project, and so much more that he's left us. He'll be remembered by those of us who knew him for his wonderful smile and his great hugs, his unique laugh, and his Snicker bars that he loved to give out to everybody and anybody. His notorious ball cap and t-shirt collection that included more items than 10 men could possibly use in a lifetime. His grandchildren will remember the trips to the national parks with him and birthdays at the Sunrise Cafe, where their grandfather knew all the waitresses, and Valentine's Days going to Brahms during their annual sale of 2 quarts of ice cream for $10, and how he let each grandchild buy their own quart and eat it right out of the carton. A tradition that has to continue. His grandchildren you were his world. He just adored you all. You were his pride and joy. You were the only ones he would let sit in his chair, and you were the ones who could come up to him and touch him and say, "I love you," and he would fall apart. It was fitting that he was playing soccer with one of his grandchildren the night before he died. For many of us, all we have to do to remember Gary is look out the window of our home. This is true for no one more than for Mary Jane. Gary would buy a special plant for Mary Jane on Mother's Day, on birthdays, and other special occasions, something like a Japanese maple or an azalea. Their yard, as we've heard and seen, is a masterpiece. Each year, he and Mary Jane would put in the annuals, and Gary would give her a map of where they each should go, and she would dig the holes and she would plant them, and then when she went inside, he would dig them all up and replant them. His was a story of roots and wings. He planted roots in the soil of his family and his community and this earth, and he gave people wings to fly. Through all the years, Mary Jane always felt safe in his arms and at home. He loved and was loved. He visited faraway places and served his country. And most of all, he did his part to make this world more beautiful. And now, may we do the same, and may he rest in peace.
You know there's a light that glows by the front door. Don't forget the keys under the mat. When childhood stars shine Always stay humble and kind. Go to church 'cause your mama says so. Visit Grandpa every chance that you can. It won't be wasted time. Always stay humble and kind. Hold the door, say please, say thank you. Don't steal and don't cheat and don't lie. I know you got mountains to climb, but always stay humble and kind. When the dreams you're dreaming come to you, when the work you put in is realized, let yourself feel the pride, but always stay humble and kind. Don't expect a free ride from no one. Don't hold a grudge or a chip. And here's why: bitterness keeps you from flying. Always stay humble and kind. Know the difference between sleeping with someone and sleeping with someone you love. I love you ain't no pickup line, so always be humble and kind. Hold the door, say please, say thank you. Don't steal and don't cheat and don't lie. I know you've got mountains to climb, but always stay humble and kind. When the dreams you're dreaming come to you, when the work you put in is realized, let yourself feel the pride, but always stay humble and kind. When it's hot, eat a root beer popsicle, shut off the AC and roll the windows down. Let that summer sun shine. Always stay humble and kind. Don't take for granted the love this life gives you. When you get where you're going, don't forget, turn back around and help the next one in line. Always stay humble and kind.
Let us pray. Eternal God, we are thankful for every gift of life which brings us joy and peace and strength of heart. For people like Gary, whose life speaks words of hope and affirmation to us. We're thankful for his good-natured spirit and the ways he gave so freely. We're thankful for his energy and for his investment in our lives. We are enriched because he lived. Let us go forward honoring him by seeking those places where we can express our passion and love and pride. Make us too a part of the world's light and not its darkness, its acceptance and not its judgment, its love and not its destructiveness. Teach us in new and deeper ways that we are members one of another. Comfort his family and bind us all closer together to appreciate every moment we have together. Now we say farewell to a dear man. We loved you living, and we love you now. Rest now in love. We will bear you home in our hearts. Amen. He who we love and lose is no longer where he was before. He's now wherever we are. Let us honor the life of Gary Allen Lindaman in whatever number of days ahead are still ours to claim. May you bring joy and love and generosity to the world and beauty. And may his life and may his spirit go with you now and always. Amen.